Hi, my name's Mark Walker and I'm editorial director at the FinTech Times, and we're here in seamless Middle East and Saudi Arabia for Seamless TV. We've got a very interesting interview to start with, and I'm going to ask my interviewee, David Birch, to introduce himself to you.
Hi, I'm Dave Birch. I'm an author, advisor and commentator on digital financial services.
Fantastic. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
Oh, thanks very much, Mark.
And the interesting thing that you just pointed out, you're a sort of a commentator and overseer of what's going on. So give us a little bit of an overview of where you think we are currently with sort of payments and the fintech sector generally globally.
Well, I think it's interesting the way Seamless has picked out, payments and identity as, I know I sound so boring about it. I keep saying this, but those two subjects are so closely related. And we see a situation now where in many ways fraud is intolerable, particularly around some of the new payment mechanisms. So we need advances in payments and identity in a way going hand in hand to really improve the situation. So, I'm going to be looking at both of those things today, and I'm excited to see what people are doing in the region.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting Seamless here, which has the mix of retail, e-commerce and fintech all together, which we don't really see an awful lot of in the same place in Europe. Do you think that's where it should be, or is that a function of the payments focus in the region, do you think?
It's in many ways it's still early days in the region, so there's a lot of linkage between all of those areas. Actually, as things move on, I begin to think that particularly the identity stuff is going to be infrastructure across all of those things, retail, e-commerce, and everything else. So I think the way things are at the moment, we're seeing it evolve, but I sort of feel in the future. This is just me talking. Really, the identity stuff is going to be the important stuff, and everything else is going to build on top of that.
And I think that's a very interesting thing in the region. As I said, for my experience in the region, obviously identity is quite key, especially here in the UAE, because obviously it's a region full of expats. And so an Emirati ID is linked to everything that you have out here. So where in perhaps the Europe, we're still a bit fragmented. Not everyone has passports, not everyone has identity. There may be a much quicker route to payments by identity here in the region, potentially.
I think what you'll see here, Mark, certainly I'm expecting to see this as the talks go on through the day. We sit at an interesting crossroads here between very different cultural views of identity. So the idea that in let's call it the real world for sake of argument, you have an ID and you use that to get your bank account and pay your parking fines and whatever it is that you do. I don't think that maps one-to-one into what we might call the metaverse or the virtual worlds or so on. In reality, you're actually many different people. I'm Dave Birch at work. I'm Dave Birch, a director of Consult Hyperion. I'm Dave Birch, a Man City fan. I'm Dave Birch, the Dungeons and Dragons player. And really, in the online world, those things are kind of separate. So, and you want to be able to partition. So the idea that you take your one identity from the real world and move that into, that doesn't seem quite right to me. And in fact, I think you might actually see a very strong trend away from that. I know art isn't always the guidance on this, but if you read some of the sort of seminal literature about the online future, Neil Stevens, people keep talking about Neil Stevenson because of Snow Crash, but William Gibson and so on. There is this sort of interesting idea that in the virtual world, you get a kind of privacy that you don't have in the mundane world anymore. And that requires a more sophisticated identity infrastructure. To people like me, it requires a real digital identity infrastructure. It's not just a question of taking your real world ID card and going everywhere online with it. Apart from anything else, most of the time you're online, it's nobody's business who you are. If I'm posting in the Manchester City fans forum, it's nobody's business who I am in the fintech world, or It's just you have these kind of separate persona. And in the virtual world, you'll have the opportunity to to do those properly with real secure infrastructure.
Okay, it's interesting. And I mean, I think as we're recording this, I think in about an hour and a half or so, you're going to be on stage talking about metaverse. What sort of areas are you going to be covering on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. They've been kind enough to ask me to do the keynote on the metaverse, which you would think, everybody got a bit fed up with, those Facebook things with the bubble people with no legs, and everyone's like, oh, well, this sucks. But pretty soon Apple will come out with their goggles, other people will come out with other technologies. I mean, I don't even focus on the visual stuff. I mean, it could be through your AirPods or, so the idea that actually the virtual world is going to become slightly more immersive, I think that's inevitable, whether it's using Facebook goggles or not. So people got a bit focused on the visual interface and got a bit disappointed with it. I mean, unless you're playing Call of Duty or something, it's not that fun, But they weren't really thinking about what to me is the more interesting part, which is how you do business in that environment. Like, how do you do the transactions in that environment? And at my personal experience, from a couple of things I've been involved in, is it's really at its very early stage, it's very clunky. So, you're in a virtual world and you want to buy something, you've basically got to come out and go into the old world of credit cards and, get some number and then go back in again and all that sort of thing. I mean, people aren't actually doing business in the metaverse at the moment. But if you think about what that will mean, it takes us into the world of Web3 and tokens and digital currencies and also, of course, digital identities. And it could well be, and I think it's very interesting to explore this idea, it could well be that it's the metaverse that becomes the catalyst for some innovation in those spaces. And the reason for that, I think, is that, people often say that one of the problems with the internet is that it was built without an identity layer, which is true, and that it was built without a payments layer, which is also true. And there's been no end of problems that come from that. But the metaverse isn't going to be like that. The metaverse will be built with security, with identity, with payments built in at the very beginning. Now, of course, we don't want it to be a sort of just a 3D version of a walled garden. That would be very unimaginative. It wouldn't really be a place for new possibilities. So the idea that the metaverse becomes a place where you can have digital identities, digital assets of different kinds, including money, that belong to you that you can move around, will undoubtedly open up new kinds of commerce that we haven't seen yet. So in theory at least, I think, because it will have that security infrastructure, the metaverse will become a safer and therefore cheaper place to do business. And that's what interests me. So the pretty pictures and the 3D and whatever, fun, but that's not the guts of what's interesting.
It's not going to be a Ready Player One sort of thing.
No. I mean, to the kind of people, I work mainly in the financial services, and so to people in the sort of serious financial services sector, it's about tokenization and Web3 and decentralized finance. And if the metaverse is a convenient way of managing those new transaction types, then actually it's pretty attractive.
Yeah, and I think you shared a couple of anecdotes with me previously about how history is littered with people that invented for a future they didn't know about, but assumed there would be a reason for it. Where do you think we are on the process of that with metaverse? Are we inventing for an unknown future, or are we kind of?
Well, no, I don't say I'm not, but I you're right. I mean, I'm very interested in what people call paleo futures, like studying what people used to think about the future. Partly because it's funny, because we're all wrong about the future. So it's funny going back 100 years and reading what people thought. But also because understanding why they got it wrong helps us, I think, to formulate our own scenarios. So if you go back 50 years, then why did people think this? Why didn't it happen? And then you can feed that into your own view of, well, where are we going next? And one of the sort of basic rules of that kind of futurology is if you want to look forward a generation, you need to look back a couple of generations because the pace of change increases. So if you go back sort of 50 years, well, that was the dawn of credit cards and you know, if you look in my mobile banking app is lovely. My bank's done a fantastic job. It has all sorts of snazzy features now. But the products that are inside it are a current account, a 50-year-old credit card product, a debit card product which sprang from those same rails.
It's basically a product with a new skin.
A savings product.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like the products in there are so when we look at those kind of next generation products that we built in those new environments, when you look at sort of Web3 and DeFi and whatever, it's not going to be to build simulations of the things that we created 50 years ago. It will be to create something new. And I think that the idea that you're going to go into the metaverse and go down to Carrefour and do your shopping and pay, like, that's not interesting. That's not revolutionary. That's not going to change things at all. So you have to start thinking, well, what would be the different experiences that would go into that environment? Obviously, I think a lot of them are identity related because of what I've already said about privacy. But one key factor, I think, people talk about the composability of DeFi and Web3, the idea that you have these kind of building blocks that you can put together. I think one of the consequences of that is that you'll have much more complex financial instruments, you know, using those building blocks to build more sophisticated, based on risk management techniques. So you'll have more sophisticated, more complex instruments that are being traded. But of course, they'll be traded between bots, not between people. And so the nature of those transactions will change a lot. So I think, you know, it seems funny to me when you see those little visions of the metaverse people make, where it's people going into a bank branch or going into a supermarket, those kind of weird simulations of reality. That can't be right. That can't be where we're going.
Yeah, like you say, there's no point putting a new digital skin on something that's 50 years old. We should be looking more into the future.
So those kind of virtual realities. So people like Umberto Eco talk about hyper reality. You know, not trying to simulate reality as it is, but trying to construct a reality as it should be. He talks about being nostalgic for Disneyland, which I think is a interesting way of framing it. So when you go back and say, well, how should financial services work? How should shopping work? You don't say, well, how does banking work? How can we make a 3D model of that? That's the sort of thing technologists do. There's no vision to it. It's more interesting to think, okay, how should financial services work? You know, one of the narratives I think which suffuses fintech at the moment is this idea that the next phase of evolution is about financial health, you know, rather than delivering individual financial services. You know, what is the point of fintechs to improve the financial health of people? So if you work backwards from that, say, well, okay, if that's the goal, how should things work? I think you end up with a different set of instruments. And some of those I think we can sort of see an outline, you know, digital currencies, and others I think we haven't got a clue about yet what they'll be like.
I think, as always, there is many things to talk about. There's always a positive future that I think we're looking for. So I don't think we have to give up on our day jobs just yet. I think fintech's going to be around for a while, but as you say, may change its guise a little bit and be termed something
Well,
differently.
I think it was Benedict Evans, I think, who said, I hope I've not got this right, I think he said something like, you know, up until now, most of fintech has been about giving Americans the things that the rest of us have had for years, you know, instant payments and all this sort of thing. And now it's time for fintech to move on a little. And now we're moving into this era of embedded finance, invisible payments, you know, the idea that you embed financial services into experiences, which to me is, I wouldn't say I was a great expert on that, but it's very, very interesting and very exciting to me. So So if you like, we're moving away from the sort of fintech era, and we're moving into, I mean, what you probably think of as like the open finance era, the open data era, where fintech is in the vanguard of that, but it's not all about fintech anymore.
Some might say the seamlessness of financial institutions.
Well, actually, yes, you're better at marketing than I am. So, yes, you're right. I should have used the word seamless. But you see what I mean? Like that idea that finance becomes part of a seamless journey. Yeah. That's quite interesting. And I think, I mean, I said a couple of days ago, you know, if you were looking to start something now in the sort of fintech area, those days of the sort of the interchange-led, card-based neobank, those days are over really, and it's probably more in the embedded, more in the sort of less sexy plumbing areas where the next
big advancements are going to be.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day about you know, the era of the fintech unicorns going, and now it's the era of what the VC guys call the dragons,
right?
You know, which are smaller but deliver better returns. And I think there is a strain of thinking which says the unicorns were fintech, the dragons might well be regtech, because they're more to do with infrastructure. If you're going to deliver financial health, it has to be in these regulated duty of care environments. The cost of compliance, KYC, AML and so on, is steadily going up.
Yeah.
So maybe, you know, one of the things I'll be looking at when I'm walking around the floor here, maybe it's more like regtech plus open banking. I don't know. I mean, let's see what other people think.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. As always, David, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining me here on Seamless TV, hosted by the FinTech Times.
Great to talk to you, Mark.